Hello, today we're going to be blending some charcoal, and the purpose of this video is to explore the effects of certain blending tools. I'm going to be testing out some of the blending tools that I use most frequently in my videos. First, let me go over the stuff that I'm going to be using, and then I'm going to show you what we're going to do. First, obviously, I'm going to use a charcoal pencil. This is a Horizon woodless charcoal pencil. It's a medium charcoal pencil. I'm also going to be using the following blending tools. A brush. This is a hard bristle brush which blends really well. I'm going to be using a tortillon. This is a homemade tortillon. I have a tutorial on how I make these. I'm going to be using a Q-tip, a bit of tissue, and finally my own finger. Now let me show you how I plan to do this. First, I'm going to draw some patches on this piece of paper. I'm going to draw several lighter and smaller patches here, and then test out the blending tools on those and discuss the effects. And then I'm going to draw some slightly larger and darker patches below them, and then I'm going to test the blending tools on those. And then once we're done examining the effects of these blending tools, I'm going to show some examples on a couple of my sketches. Let's go. Alright, let's lay down some charcoal. First, several lighter patches. And you'll find that different blending tools have different effects on different media. So this video is focusing on charcoal, but I may do one on graphite in the future, and I think you'll find that some of these blending tools have a completely different effect, or at least a slightly different effect on graphite, and some of them that work really well with charcoal actually don't work that well with graphite. But charcoal and graphite are different media, and they both take a little bit of practice in adapting. Also, the reason why I'm going to be creating these lighter patches and darker patches is because you'll also find that the effects of blending tools will be slightly different depending on whether you're working on a darker area or a lighter area. So I'm going to draw some really dark, large ones here. And I'm doing this carelessly because it's all going to be blended in eventually, one way or another. Okay, that's it. Now let me decide on the order in which I'm going to be doing this. First, we're going to start with a brush, then a tortillon, then a Q-tip, tissue, finger. Okay. I've zoomed in a little bit. So now let's start blending. First the brush. Now you can see that the brush is blending well and adding some value to it. It's making it a little bit darker, but you can see that it's still leaving some of that texture and some of those lines. This is one of the effects that you'll notice when using brushes. So if you want to leave some of the texture, if you want some of the lines visible, the brush will be the tool to use. Now let's check out the tortillon. A slightly different effect, as you can see. It's also adding a little bit of value, making the patch darker, obviously, but it's blending a lot more thoroughly, and we are losing those clean edges, we are losing that texture, and the patch is becoming more smooth. There. Another good thing about a tortillon is that when it gets dirty, you can use it for drawing, but we'll get to that later, I guess. Now let's have a look at what the Q-tip will do. It appears to be having a very similar effect as the brush, so it's not removing the texture altogether, and in order to make it blend better I have to use more pressure. So if I use more pressure, what's happening is that it's actually taking away a little bit of the value, making it a little bit lighter than the brush, and we still have some of that texture and those lines left, so that's something to keep in mind. Let's try the tissue. The tissue appears to be wearing down very quickly, and it blends kind of softly, but it takes away a lot of the value. It probably picks up a lot of the charcoal, and it doesn't blend as thoroughly as some of the previous ones, I think. Now let's try the finger. The finger blends pretty well. It's actually removing some of these lines and some of the texture, but it completely lacks precision. And the same goes for the tissue and also the Q-tip to a certain extent. Now we're going to try these. Another thing about the finger is that it also appeared to be making this a little bit lighter. You can see that it's a lot lighter than the patch done with the tortillon and the brush. The brush seems to be pushing the charcoal into the paper when you press a little harder, but it's still preserving this texture. The tortillon also pushes the charcoal deeper, but it's making a smoother surface. Now let's have a look at these darker and larger patches. First, the brush. It's blending very smoothly, and what can also help a lot is that you'll see a lot of this residue, and if you use it and move it around a little bit, you can actually blend even more smoothly. So when you blend with a brush, you will get a very smooth result, and it will be maybe just a touch lighter than it was, but you'll get a very smooth, dark, even surface. So the brush apparently is good for very dark areas if you want them completely smooth. Let's see what the tortillon will do. Very similar effect, I think. Making it just a tiny bit lighter, but blending very thoroughly. Very few of these white spaces in between. It's doing a pretty good job. And one of the things that you noticed with tortillons when working with charcoal is that they actually work better with charcoal than with graphite. With graphite, they tend to burnish the paper quite a bit and make the situation with the graphite shine even worse. But with charcoal, because it provides more friction, they actually tend to get fuzzier and get better the more you use them. So tortillon is also very good for blending these larger, darker areas when you want them smooth and even. The Q-tip. The Q-tip blends, but I would say that it doesn't appear to be blending as well as the previous two. I don't know how much you can see it, but it's making these lighter patches and a lot of these white spaces, white little dots in between. It's almost creating a texture, so if you want a smooth dark surface, I wouldn't really recommend a Q-tip. Let's see a tissue. The tissue, I think, has a similar effect. It's blending a little bit more smoothly, but it's making the patch a lot lighter, and again we have some of these white areas in between. I'm not really sure if it works so well with these darker areas, but you can use a tissue that's picked up some of that charcoal to create some nice shading and blending effects with it, as you can see. And you can do the same thing with a Q-tip. Now let's finally try the finger. The finger is actually doing a great job. And I can tell you, one of the things that you'll notice with the finger is that the larger the patch and the more charcoal there is, the better it will blend. Because when you start blending with a finger, it will tend to pick up some of the charcoal and make the area a little bit lighter. But the more you work with it and the more charcoal your finger picks up, the darker and smoother the area will get. So I think your finger is the most suitable tool when working with larger pieces which don't really require that much precision. So when you have a really dark drawing that you're working on, especially a larger one, and you're working on something that doesn't really have too much tiny detail on it, your finger can actually get the job done really fast, and it can give you some really smooth nice dark areas. Now once we've explored the effects of these blending tools, let me just sum up a little bit. So like I said, brushes, they tend to blend pretty well, but with these lighter patches they tend to leave a lot of the texture visible. Tortillons blend pretty well either with darker or lighter patches, and they tend to remove much of that texture. And these are, the brush and the tortillon are the tools that I prefer to use most of the time when working with charcoal. The Q-tips and tissues are a little bit softer, and they create some of these softer, lighter tones, and they tend to work better with lighter tones. The fingers are natural blending tools. They actually work pretty well, but they seem to work better with larger, darker areas, and obviously they lack precision. Now I'm going to show you some examples of some of the advantages of using these tools on a couple of sketches that I've prepared. I'm going to show the effects of brush and tortillon. First, I'm going to be doing a sketch of this squirrel, and I already started working on it. First, I'm going to do some work with a charcoal pencil, and then I'm going to show you how I use my blending tools. I've done a sketch of a squirrel, and now I'm going to show you how you can blend this fur with a brush. I've often talked about the effects of blending with a brush on hair and fur when drawing wildlife, so this is a much smaller sketch and a quick one, but hopefully we'll be able to see those effects here as well. I've also done a little bit of shading on this tree or wooden pole that it is standing on, but that's not really the focus. Here you can see on a smaller scale exactly what I was talking about when blending with the brush. A lot of these strokes that I made trying to imitate the texture of the fur, a lot of these strokes are still visible, so when you blend with a brush you will make these strokes a little bit softer, but they will still be there, so it can help you create realistic looking hair or fur. And you can see that you can do the same thing with other objects such as wood, stone, etc. Now let me just blend this a little bit more. Now like I said, A tortillon tends to blend more thoroughly and remove a lot of the texture. So if you want to make certain parts of that fur fluffier and remove some of those lines and texture, you can use a tortillon in a combination with a brush, and we can try to soften and fluff up some of these hairs on the tail. And around the butt. Just clean this up a little bit. Another advantage of the tortillon is that it allows for more precision, so you can use it almost like a pencil. But that's it for this sketch. Now let's move on to the next one, where I'm gonna be working mostly with a tortillon and show you some of the advantages of working with this blending tool. Here's the second sketch. In case you're wondering what this is actually a sketch of Obi-Wan Kenobi holding his lightsaber. But I'm mostly going to be focusing on his robe because I want to show you how you can use the tortillon for drawing clothes. First, I draw some of these darker areas, some of these darker folds, and then I'll move on to some of the lighter tones. I'm doing this very loosely. No need for precision right now. So that's Obi-Wan Kenobi holding his lightsaber. But now, let me show you what you can do with the tortillon when you're drawing clothes. The first thing you need to do is go over some of these darker areas and get it dirty. And then comes the fun part. You can actually use it for drawing. And as a drawing tool, you'll find that the tortillon allows you to create these smooth shapes instead of clean edges, and that's exactly what you need when you're drawing clothes. So he has these long sleeves. It's a very loose robe, Jedi robe, with a lot of these folds. And like I said, this is a very rough sketch. If you want a more detailed drawing, you can observe the effects of a tortillon in some of my more detailed, longer drawings. But I just wanted to show you how this thing works. So like I said, the brush and the tortillon are the two primary blending tools I use. I use some of the other ones as well, and I've shown you how they can be useful. I think that generally speaking, the best thing to do is to explore, to experiment, and to try to find out what works for you, but also not to limit yourself on using just one type of blending tool, but to see what works better in different situations. That will be all for now. Thank you for watching. I hope you found some of this interesting. I'll see you in the next video.